when you come up with some of these lists, your lists of lies, your lists of anger, your list of sins, your list of talents, strengths, and abilities, find a person of spiritual authority, make an appointment, and go sit face to face and tell those lists. Sometimes these meetings take several hours, by the way, Randy. So be prepared, whoever this person is has the time to sit there, whether it's in the confessional booth or at Caribou Coffee. Just figure out enough time to get this done. And then, the encouragement there is to feel the relief of what the Bible teaches us about the truth will set us free.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, and today we'd like to present part 3 of a series that's called The 7 Principles of Recovery. We hope that you're enjoying this new series, and today's part 3 is entitled Acknowledge Strengths and Weaknesses. Here now is the Faithful and True podcast, part 3.
Randy, we've been talking about the 7 principles of recovery. We've been basing it on the work that I did for the Life Guide for Men that has been published by our good friends in ministry, Life Recovery International down in Orlando. And today we're moving on to principle 3, I think.
And principle 3, Mark, is... we make a list of our sins and weaknesses and confess those to a person of spiritual authority. In other words, telling the truth, I must leave the darkness.
Yeah. And as our listeners know already, I think the audience is aware that back in the 90s there was a movement to put Christ back into the 12 steps, and I was one of the many writers at the time who was doing that, I think, and we combined the 12 steps. The first step remains the same, but the second and third step was Principle 2. We talked about that in our last show. And then today we're going to talk about what is in fact Principle or Step 4 and 5, which I combined into Principle number 3. And as the audience may hear, I've also kind of put a spin on my own interpretation of who you should tell the truth to in terms of confession. So that was the part at the end of the principle there where you mentioned that we are to tell our stories or confess our sins to a person of spiritual authority.
Okay, right. And how is that best achieved? How do you select who that person of spiritual authority would be?
Well, I always ask the men that I'm working with, a very simple question, and that is, who in your life would you consider to be a spiritual authority? Mm-hmm. And coming out of various religious traditions, people might have a different concept of that. Our Catholic, Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, they would obviously look toward their priest or a priest, because in the Roman Catholic Church, a priest is the person who is of the highest spiritual authority. Not only that, but when a Catholic goes to confession, a priest really has the authority through his ordination, which they would consider to be a sacrament, that he has the spiritual authority to be the living conduit of the grace that has been provided for us through Christ.
Well, and the Catholic Church, let's face it, has got this opportunity that we're talking about today. They have this format available just because of the confessional.
Yeah, that's right. And I've always been very fascinated with the confession, having grown up as a Protestant. We tend to... I don't know if downplay is the right word. I don't think anyone in the Protestant churches would say that we're downplaying confession. I mean, it's certainly very biblical. James 5:16 talks about it very clearly. If anyone is sick, let him gather the elders of the church, and let's confess our sins one to another, so that you might be healed. So James is very clear that confession is very important in terms of an act of healing. And yet in the Protestant church, we really haven't had a well-identified vehicle for it. My experience in the various churches that I've been a part of over the course of my life is that we will have a time during the worship service, most often in silence. We will be given a 30 seconds or something, some uncomfortable length of silent time in which, we are encouraged to confess our sins to God. And there are some churches that would have a liturgy, kind of maybe even a responsive reading in which we, collectively admit collective sins. Now, when I, got in recovery myself, one of the things that I found inherently valuable in terms of freedom was, my first ability to tell my own story, talk about my past, tell about the egregious things that I had done to other people. And, that took the form of a group early on in which, there was a number of men present, and I, told my own story. That was a form of confession in a way, and it was very relieving. What I often encourage the Protestant, the evangelical Protestant men that I work with, is to, in fact, if the pastor of their church, for example, or one of the pastors of their church, they would consider to be a spiritual authority, to even make an appointment to sit down with that pastor and, in a very systematic way, go over your story, your perception of your sinfulness, and tell the truth. And in other words, I think there's power in talking about this face-to-face with someone.
And as you prepare yourself to share this sinfulness, I'm sure that what you're really doing as you are taking account of your life, of the sins that you've committed, you're probably pretty fearful of sharing that.
That is exactly right, Randy. Meaning that, and here's a thought for our audience to maybe take a pause the broadcast for a moment, and ask yourself this question: when did you learn to lie? And lying is kind of a central feature of the principle that we're working on here, meaning that we're in this principle encouraging people to become truth tellers. And one of the really important questions here is, when did you learn to lie? And maybe some of the audience is reacting to that. It's like, I don't know that I learned to lie. I just started doing it. Well, okay, ask yourself that question. When did you start doing lying? And what was the purpose of it? And
isn't lying actually one of the cornerstones of any addiction?
Well, certainly it would be, because we're doing behaviors that we think if other people found out about those behaviors, they would automatically reject us, hate us, leave us. So really, lying is a form of self-protection. It's one of the ways that we present ourselves to other people, hoping that they will not reject us. And if you go back to perhaps even your childhood, you may recognize that there were times when all of us learned how to manipulate our parents by lying.
Sure.
And that's kind of what I'm encouraging the listeners to think about. I think about it for myself, and I'm just aware at the moment, Randy, I don't want to, allow anyone to think that I'm trying to do my own therapy on this show. I'm just reflecting things that I've learned along the way. In my family, my father being a pastor, there were times when if you told him the truth about what you were thinking or feeling, he would have way too much advice, kind of a sermon, and you were probably going to get a lot more words than you wanted to hear. I used to say, he likes to talk a lot more than I like to listen. So lying starts early on very simply. In other words, someone might ask you how you're feeling, and if you say, I'm feeling fine, that might be a lie. I used to do that one with my parents. My mother, by the way, if I had any kind of problem whatsoever, she was very anxious and somewhat of a problem solver. So with every answer that I gave, she would usually have 10 more questions. So, I learned that there was a mathematical relationship between answers to her questions and the number of ongoing questions. So I learned to lie to her, said, how are you feeling? She was a nurse. How are you feeling? I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling fine. I don't have any problems. Leave me alone, more or less, was what I was saying to her. So, I really do think that before I ever got to school, I learned how to, lie because I was manipulating what I perceived to be at that time difficult reactions to whatever it was that I was feeling or doing.
And there's probably a fine line, is it not true, that there's a fine line between lying to others and lying to yourself?
Well, that's true. I think, there's an old saying that a lie told 2 or 3 times becomes the truth. But I do think we lie to ourselves, and we sometimes deny the reality of something, or we minimize the reality of something. Lies that are told to other people, we inherently internalize, and so before too long, our sense of our own reality gets a little warped as well. Lying is a very pervasive pattern that really takes a lot of control over our life.
Well, as you just invited the audience to think back to the first time that they lied, does that include who did they lie to? Did they get away with it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What reaction did they have? How did that become an ongoing pattern? And think about it more simply. It's not that you did some egregious sinful act and lied about that. You may have lied early on about your feelings, your homework assignment, lots of very simple things. Who hit your younger sister? Well, it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm. And you were the only one in the room.
And you were the only one in the room. She hit me first. That's a lie. Whatever it is. So yeah, I'd like for the audience to take a pause and do a little self-exploration on this one. One of the things, again, the listeners who are familiar with the 12 steps will, of course, recognize in this principle is that it's based on the 4th and 5th step of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the 4th step of AA really starts with this term, moral inventory. We made a moral inventory of our life, and so I want to look at that for a few minutes here. I'm wondering, now that we're back from break, how our listeners did with the question of when they started to lie, what some of those early lies were about. Whose attention, whose approval, whose presence in their life might they have been trying to manipulate with those early lies. And their pattern of lying, by the way, will then be part of that moral inventory. One of the ways to think about this principle is to maybe make a list of the major lies that you've told throughout your life. And if you are, in fact, listening to the show and you are a recovering addict, what are some of the lies that you use to cover up your addiction with those around you that you really love?
Well, with this principle and the focus being on sharing those lies with someone of spiritual authority, what is it about doing that same thing of sharing those lies, telling the truth, coming clean with somebody that you love?
Well, that's one of the principles of intimacy disorder that we talk about, which seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? That if you really love somebody, you would think that you would be able to tell them the truth. And I think the source of this intimacy disorder is a certain amount of anxiety, meaning that we have the perception, and it's one of the core beliefs in our addiction, that if you knew me, you'd hate me and leave me. So when you think about that core belief, think about how you presented yourself in the early days of a relationship to someone whose affection you were courting or seeking or dating, did you not present your best self? What part of yourself did you keep locked away? One of the interesting questions around here when we do our couples work, and we're doing a couples workshop this upcoming weekend, we're going to be talking to the couples about how they met, what their dating life was like, and one of the questions is going to be, how much truth about your past did you tell your future spouse, when you were dating? And I think most of us who are older would not have thought at all about telling anything about our sexual history while we were dating. We were going to present our best self, put our best foot forward, try to impress and gain the attention, affection, and eventual love of the person that perhaps we seek to marry. So we know, I think, inherently that it's more difficult to tell the truth to someone that we love because we are inherently afraid that if they knew the truth about us, they would leave us. One of the sub-principles of intimacy disorder is the person that I love the most may in fact be the person that I have the hardest time telling the truth to. Mm-hmm. Again, because of the fact that she's more important or he's more important to me. I remember this clearly when I went to treatment, because when I went to treatment, I was in a group of about 25 people, all of whom were strangers. They were from all over the country. I'd never met them before. And the very first night I was in treatment, I sat around a circle, and all of them told me a very short version of their story. And that kind of emboldened me to tell a short version of my story. It was the first time that I told any other people, and certainly a group of people, some of the details of my sexual history. Now, that, as I look back on it, was relatively easy to do, meaning that these people were strangers. I knew at some point when I got out of the hospital I might not ever see them again, probably wouldn't ever see them again. So in light of, that core belief that we have, if you really knew me, you might leave me, there was a part of me about these strangers, I didn't really care if they left me, so it was easier to tell the truth. What impressed this upon me was the first couple weeks of treatment, I was telling the truth all over the place. It felt good. It was relieving. It took a burden off my shoulders. Then Debbie arrived for Family Week. Mm-hmm. And it's like,
the game changed.
The game changed. The gates closed. The burden returned. And Debbie, I think in those early couple of days of Family Week, said, how is it that you can, have all of these new really great friends, that you're telling everything to, you're spilling your guts to, and and when I come into the room, you shut down, you clam up, yeah, mm-hmm. And it really was related to the fact that she was the most important person in my life and the one that I was the most afraid of losing. So that's one of the principles here of intimacy disorder. And in the third principle here, we're really kind of looking at this intimacy disorder. That's part of the moral inventory that we are taking. Mm-hmm. It's all about the lies that we have told. Now, the moral inventory, the history of our lives, is really a lot more extensive than just the lies that we've told. Mm-hmm. What have we been lying about? Well, it's about behaviors. So moral inventory is really being able to come up with the entire history of your life. It's not just, necessarily your sexual sins, but it's any kind of behavior or even thought life over the years that you've considered sinful or negative or destructive. One of the central parts of this principle for me is over the years, how have I dealt with my anger? What have I done with my anger? Have I been loud and explosive? Have I been a quiet repressive type who tends to stuff it and hide it away? Pat Carnes wrote a book, A Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps, a number of years ago, and he spends about 3/4 of his time in the fourth step helping people understand the healthy and unhealthy ways that they've dealt with anger. So How angry you are might be an important part of this inventory that you take. One of the things I encourage the men to do when I'm working with them is make a list of all people in your life that you are angry at, and what are you angry at them about, and how have you historically expressed that anger? Well, a lot of men answer, I haven't ever expressed that anger. Well, that's part of the inherent problem, because in some ways, those of us that have done addiction, acting out is a form of the expression of anger. If I say to others around me that I care about and love, I'm going to go ahead and act out. That's a way of saying, the heck with you. I'm angry at you, so I, therefore deserve to do this. So understanding your anger, who you're angry at, what you're angry about, and how you've expressed your anger, I think is an important part of this principle. I also think that just understanding your whole history, at our men's workshop, we do what we call the egg exercise, and that's a drawing that we draw stories from our life. That can easily be a part of Principle 3 when we just look back at, all of our behaviors, throughout the entire history of our life. Now, here's a kicker for me that I think is important, and I think it also begins to teach us what we would call around here the ampersand or the and. And moral inventory, when you think about inventory, and I'm not an accountant, as everyone who works with me knows, but I do understand enough about accounting to know that it's a ledger of positive and negative. It's about debts and receivables, isn't it? So a moral inventory should not only be about the negative parts of yourself, the lying, the anger, the history, the acting out, the sinfulness, and all of that, but it should also be an inventory of your strengths. It should also be a recognition of your gifts, your talents, some of the good things that you've done. Now, by the way, these principles are an ongoing thing to work on. In the early days of recovery for the addicts out there, your shame may be so powerful that you have a really hard time accepting, remembering, and certainly want to be humble and don't want to be grandiose or narcissistic. So you really have a hard time getting into, what your strengths and talents are. But I think this is an inherently necessary part of this principle. And as we seek a vision for God's calling in our life, we're going to need to be aware of what our strengths, talents, and giftedness is. Mm-hmm. So I'm just encouraging, because I know there's a lot of people out there listening that are farther down the road here. And don't just think, here's one of the things to take from the broadcast today. Don't just think that a moral inventory, Principle 3, is about bad things. It's also about good things. I spent some time, I forget when it was, but I think it happened really predominantly when I was challenged to get back into counseling after I'd been sober for a number of years. And the person who challenged me to do that was actually Pat Carnes, the founder of our field. And he asked me a simple question. He said, I know when you were doing counseling back in your active addiction, you made lots of mistakes and you had a lot of problems. He said, were there good things that you did in counseling? Were you, in fact, at points, a good counselor? And it was shortly after that I received a letter from one of my clients during that phase of time, who had read my book and for the first time really understood my story and what was going on for me during the time that I was working with this person. And this person said, I'm really happy, Mark, that you took your stuff seriously. You're in recovery, and I so admire what you did in your book. And I know that when you were counseling, you did a lot of crazy stuff. But I need you to know that when you were working with me, you really helped me quite a bit. And so I was like slapped in the face by that letter. It's like, shame is one thing, and acceptance of all the mistakes I made as a counselor earlier in my life, I think that's a very important thing to do, and that's part of what this principle is about. But it's also important to remember that nothing is ever completely black and white, that even a person with an egregious addiction who was doing terribly sinful things at other times in their life was doing some good things.
Well, as we wrap up today's show, what's our parting thought that you want the audience to take with them going into their week?
Well, I think it's where we started, and that is when you come up with some of these lists, your lists of lies, your lists of anger, your list of sins, your list of talents, strengths, and abilities. Find a person of spiritual authority, make an appointment, and go sit face to face and tell those lists. Sometimes these meetings take several hours, by the way, Randy. So be prepared, whoever this person is has the time to sit there, whether it's in the confessional booth or at Caribou Coffee. Just figure out enough time to get this done. And then, the encouragement there is to feel the relief of what the Bible teaches us about the truth will set us free.
Thank you for listening to the Faithful and True podcast. We hope that today's podcast has been meaningful to you as well. We hope that you will join us again soon as we continue this series on the 7 principles of recovery. In the meantime, we invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources and over 550 podcasts like this one. So visit faithfulandtrue.com, and there you will find many resources available to you, as well as online information and registration for our 3-day intensive workshops. So until next time, we hope that the coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.